Welcome
right.
to another episode of the Wild Strength Podcast. Today, my guest is Ryan Padgett, and his walkout song is I'm Gonna Miss Her by Brad Paisley.
Is all I knew.
I hope I got to the good part.
Well,
There
I'm
you go.
gonna miss her.
I feel like, and folks will kind of understand as we get to talking about why you chose that song, but I like that song a lot, regardless of why you chose it. But like I said, I have Ryan on here. Ryan, I'll let you introduce yourself, tell everyone a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into things.
Really hope my wife doesn't hear that song.
Yeah, whatever.
No, she said, I'm Ryan Padgett. I lead a nonprofit that we teach currently serving military, first responders, and loved ones how to fly fish for stress relief. But really, kind of my background, I spent about 24 years in the military, about the last 15 of them as a C5 loadmaster, as an enlisted aviator. And then I also kind of had this weird moonlight career as a law enforcement chaplain. Kind of didn't really expect it, but it came as part of my life and really kind of became a calling for me. And so now I just retired and I am at UCCS going from the last tail end of my bachelor's and my master's in clinical psych so that I can go work with those same folks, maybe helping them through these hard transition times and finding ways to maybe help relearn what their identity is. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that, but that's really kind of been my calling. Outside of that, I have two wonderful kids. I've got a 9-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. And then I've been married for about 16 years to my beautiful bride.
For those who are listening who maybe aren't familiar what a chaplain is, can you give like a brief description of that?
So, yes, most military folks are familiar with military chaplains. And it kind of depends on where they're coming from. There's all kinds of chaplains. Not so much pastoral counseling as I do mostly trauma work. So if you want to kind of consider somebody who does the doom and gloom, the death notifications, the critical incident stress management, the talking through officers through their worst days, that's kind of the stuff that I specialized in. Another thing to add on that, I had worked with an organization called the 1033 Foundation, kind of helped lead them a little bit, where their entire purpose was to be a first responder to a first responder. So that's where kind of being a chaplain would probably be a good description of it for the ones that are doing the trauma work.
I think that's really cool. And I when I was first kind of introduced, like first started working with military, and was introduced to like what a chaplain was. And I know a lot of people want to tie spirituality and kind of what a chaplain does and associate it with religion specifically. And I think for me, it was really cool to learn that there's just so much more to that. Like maybe religion is part of what you touch on and what you help with. But like now, even in presentations that I give and conversations that I have, like I include like my background in research is in stress and stress physiology. And I include the concept of spirituality in there from the concept of like, get outdoors and find yourself, like, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. But like have meaning in life, have purpose in life. And like, that's kind of more or less where I feel like a chaplain's role is, and as Ryan kind of mentioned, he does a lot on like identities and he does a presentation on it. And that's kind of really what I want to dive into here first. But yeah, helping people just find meaning and purpose and identity and a variety of things, right? Not just in one thing. So kind of first touch on, you give this presentation on like what identity is. And as we kind of talked about before we started recording, athletes struggle with their identity when they have to retire from their sport or when they're no longer playing their sport. I've mentioned myself, like kind of I'm still in the human performance field, but I'm not a strength coach anymore. So when I stepped away from coaching, I still want to tell people like, I used to be a strength coach, but now I do this. So it is kind of an identity thing. And even in the military and in law enforcement and with the population of folks that we work with, like it's very prevalent in that population too. So what is an identity? And then where does kind of this, like, I'm going to call it an identity crisis come from?
Well, and I will say thank you, by the way, for making that distinction with chaplaincy. Don't get me wrong; most of us have a spiritual background of some kind. I do myself, but it's like you said, a lot of it is actually trauma counseling. A lot of it is actually helping somebody find their why. It's finding that thing. And really part of it, I think it's incumbent on chaplains to teach people how to maybe find their identity if they know how. So that, to answer your question, we kind of have, the organization that I run, Bold Face Fly Fishing, our underlying philosophy is based on a model that we have of how to develop identities. And we kind of look at it like this. An identity is really an intersection of anywhere between 1, 2, and 3 of these things. One of them is something that you do. Typically, people will identify with something that they do well, if they get better at it, if they overcome barriers to entry, if they, it's something that they will probably enjoy, but at some point, the harder it is that they can overcome, the better they are at it, the more they'll identify with it. The second domain that we look at is kind of what we call a place you go. It's a place you call home. It's not just a physical location, but it's also things that you can work with. And I'll explain in a second. But places where you kind of feel yourself. This is a place where you can escape, feel like you can just be at ease, be at peace there. And there's a lot of places you can find that. I mean, you can find that in your office, depending on what you do. You can find it out in the outdoors. You can find it wherever that thing is that you do the thing you do. That can be a home to you if you develop it. And then the other part of that being the stuff you work with. And I'd say like this, as a bow hunter, your favorite bow, and you have your favorite sight, all those kind of things that you're working with that thing, and it so well, like that it ticks this little bit to the right. My sight is just a little bit off right here, and you kind of know those things. And so when you work with that thing, you kind of establish a sense of confidence. You have a sense of like, oh, this is my whoopee, if you want to use a term for it.
Yeah.
And then the third one, and I'd argue probably the most important of the 3 things. It's your tribe. It's people that you consider part of your family. It doesn't have to be just biological family. As a matter of fact, a lot of times it's not. It's the people that you do the thing you do with in the places that you go to. So you'll find, and so when you have an intersection of those 3 things, those tend to make the strongest identities. It's not good, it's not bad, it's values neutral, because they both have incredible benefits to having that, but there's also some drawbacks, that we're going to talk about. So in some ways, it can kind of be a double-edged sword if you don't plan around maybe not having that someday.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, I'm going to kind of create a scenario here. You have someone who has a very tight-knit tribe in their job, no matter what their job is. They're doing something that they absolutely love. Let's see, there was the tribe, there was something that you do, and then what was the very first one?
Your first one is the thing you do. The second one is your home.
Right, your home. Okay. And then, so you kind of inevitably, because you really love this thing that you do, you have this tribe of people that are there for you, that you have their back, they have your back. So that feels like home to you. Now, and in your line of work and kind of what we were talking about here, like what happens when you lose just one of those? And then what happens when inevitably sometimes you can lose all of those?
Well, it kind of, and again, you'll find a lot of answers in psychology and spirituality if it depends.
Yeah, same as strength and conditioning.
It depends. If you lose one of those things, a lot of times you can still do that thing. You can still have an identity in that, but sometimes not. It depends. You take somebody who can no longer operate as a special operator, somebody who can no longer aviate as an aviator, someone who can no longer do that job. What they may find is there's kind of a conflation between your tribe, your work, and your home, which is meant to be there, but it means that sometimes there's some pseudo intimacy that's created. So you may not have been as intimate with your tribe as you thought you were because you did the same thing together. You didn't have to. You don't have to talk a lot because you just know they have your back. And so that's just being around them. You have that. But if you ever lose one of those 3 components, you can still maybe do this. You can go back to that place, but it may not feel the same. You can go back and hang out with your tribe, but the relationship may be different. And that's a lot of times really hard and kind of confusing for folks. They're like, well, this was my tribe. This was my family. What happened? And it's not that they did anything intentional, but the folks that are still doing that job, they're like, well, that's great to see you, man, but we got to get back to work. And then honestly, most of the time you lose access. Can be kind of difficult to lose individual components, but you can. And sometimes you can recover from that. I think one of your previous guests, Kerry McAllister, had kind of mentioned when he went from where he was at to Fort Bragg, and he lost a lot of his tribe. It is
Mhm.
possible when you lose a home to develop a new tribe, and frankly, the military is great at that.
Mhm.
What do? They have you PCS, they have you move somewhere else, but then you get a new tribe, and you learn to do your job there too. And so sometimes it's again that kind of depends. So for that one, yeah, one it's kind of you might be able to survive it. Think of it as like three legs in a stool. So
Okay.
you take away one, it's a little less stable, but it might still survive it. But if you lose all three, you're losing a big chunk of who you are. And like we had kind of talked about, the results of losing all three can, well, we'll use kind of almost a cliche with military former first responders when they get out. That a lot of them seem like they walk around like they're lost. They
Mhm.
have this low grade sense of anxiety, like because they don't know where to go, they don't know what to do. They'll isolate in their homes because that home that they had, that place they could always go to, they've lost that. They no
Mhm.
longer, so they feel ill at ease just not knowing where they can't. The place they used to go to feel most secure is gone. And then the third one is they lose the tribe too. And
Mhm.
the hard part about it is it's a form of grief, but a lot more difficult to deal with because you're still there. You can still call them, but
Mhm.
it's weird and awkward if you do it
Yeah.
more than every now and again. And a
Yeah.
lot of them, they have this sense that they feel like the day that, and honestly, I'll say I experienced it too. As soon as I retired, nobody called me. The people I had a couple of friends. It's like, oh, I'm going to lose most of them. I know that, and this is coming from somebody who knows this is going to happen. Um, but then even though really it came down to like one or two people that I still stay in touch with. Beyond that, it's not really a lot of that's been gone, and part of that is just learning to grieve that. I don't know
Yeah.
if that quite answers what you're saying, but really the answer is this: when you lose a major identity, it's can be pretty devastating.
Yeah, no, and that definitely answers it. I think, and I'll continue to dive a little bit deeper into this. And it's so common, we're sitting here talking about military, and it's common in that population. But like I mentioned, there's sport athletes who don't really know what to do with themselves when they're not playing their sport anymore. Maybe you change jobs and you have a different job, and all you've ever known was that one job, and you kind of are like, I don't know how to identify with this new job that I have, or this new life that I'm living, or this new location that I'm in. How do you um, cope is the word that I'm going to use, and if you have a better word, feel free to use a better word. How do you kind of teach people to cope or to kind of get through those changes when they have lost some sense of their identity?
Well, part of it is this, to be honest with you, and this is the chaplain in me coming out. You got to grieve it, and it helps to grieve it with people that would understand it. That's why there is such a huge value in veteran organizations or in former police officer organizations or things where they are able to catch you, people that have already transcended that and have lost that thing, that you can still go with them.
Mhm.
One of the biggest helps that I had was I was part of Officers Christian Fellowship throughout my career, and you know what? They were the first people to welcome me when I moved to Colorado. They were the first people at my door helping me move in. So having a tribe of people that had already been through that helps. So part of it is talking about it with people that you trust. Preferably, if you know some folks that have already been down that road, that's a
Yeah.
great place to start. The other part is maybe having a hard acknowledgement that it was never really your identity to begin with. And by that I mean not
Mhm.
that you didn't believe it was you, because it was
Mhm.
you. The
Mhm.
problem is somebody else owns that identity. Somebody
Mhm.
else owns the thing that you do. You can't do it without that something other giving you permission to do it. You don't get to go to those homes anymore because it was never really your home. It was never, you didn't own that home. You were renting it from the military. People that live on base housing. And then the tribe, they can become part of your tribe, but if it's only in relation to work, then you kind of lose that too. So you have put your identity into something greater than you, which is good. It's a wonderful way to learn about yourself, and it becomes a part of who you are, but it gets taken away from you.
Mhm.
Regardless of how great or beloved you are in your job, someday it ends. So to answer how you cope with that actually can be one is you grieve it and then you start building a new one. Realizing that, believe it or not, as special as your job was, it's not the only place that has it doesn't have the monopoly on happiness. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have a monopoly on purpose. And you can find a new purpose and a new tribe and a new home if you're willing to invest the time to build it.
Yeah.
It just takes time and it takes effort. It takes resources.
Yeah.
And so really that's what it can kind of come down to, is being able to rebuild that thing, just realizing, hey, it will never be my old job, but it can still be something good.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, this is where stuff like, and some of the paradigms that this works really well in, is things like fishing and hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Is fishing and hunting is something that you do. It's something that you can get really good at, that you have to invest some time, effort, attention in, and some resources into. It is a place you can start to feel at home, and it's a place, and it's a tribe that you can relate to people that has nothing to do with your former job.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my career, that was actually my coping mechanism, was fly fishing. I didn't quite understand why it was so important to me until, I mean, looking at it now, I can understand it. But when I had a rough day at work, I really did at some points really over-identify with my job, because what it means is, and what that meant was that, not that I was doing my job poorly, but I didn't get to have work problems. If your work is your life, everything's a personal problem. So it ups your stress level, and even the regular stuff that you deal with, because it's affecting who you are, not what you do. I would come home from a trip, and if it was a bad trip, my wife would know. She kind of had some really language. She found some gentle language. She's like, "Hey, honey, why don't you go fishing?" If she said that to me, that means like, you're being a jerk. Get out of my house before I punch you.
Correct.
But I would go off for a day. I'd call my dad. We'd go fishing together up in the Sierra Nevadas. And it's funny. After I did that, I would come home like life was a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
I had a different perspective. Like, wow. I realized what it was, is it was reinforcing another part of who I am. Like, well, this may not be going well on this side, but this part here, I'm still me. And that helped a lot.
Yeah.
So
I think one thing I really want to touch on is, I think humans are forever, to me, incredible creatures, right? And I think one thing that, like, I personally struggled with but have realized now is, our, like you said, our identity can continue to change throughout over time, right? We can be one person one day, and if we want to be someone completely different the next day, that's okay. And as long as we are showing up for ourselves in the best way that we can, and whoever we choose to show up to be that day, I think that's totally okay. And I think at first, when I kind of like stepped away from coaching more into the education side of things, it was really hard for me to accept that, like, oh, there's something that's different that's going on, and this is okay. Do you happen to see that a lot, where, like you said, you can find, like, you lose all three of those parts of the identity that you mentioned, and you kind of said the best thing to do is to find a new one. But I think sometimes people struggle to want to find a new one. Where do you run into that a lot, and kind of what do you suggest there?
absolutely. I think it's really common, and especially, I will say in particular, an occupation can very much become an identity. What people don't realize is that they already have other identities in their life. It's just a question what they invest in them. Most people at some point have families, whether it's their own family of origin or the family that they've built. Most people have some kind of a hobby, have something that they do. A lot of people, if a really good, strong one is, a person of faith tends to have an identity in that faith if they're investing in it. And so what it is, and this is kind of where I think some help can come in, is if you realize that you already have multiple identities in you. All you have to do is invest in those. We actually have an acronym for like how you invest in those, and it's if you want to invest something, you got to put blood, sweat, and tears in it. Well, tears is kind of our acronym. When you invest your time, your effort, your attention, resources, and sincerity, like you sincerely like to do those things, it really is part of who you are. The more you invest in that, the more that becomes who you are. Somebody doesn't become a Green Beret on their first day. After 20 years, that's very much part of who they are.
Yeah.
But how does that happen? Because they've spent so much time, effort, attention, resources, and sincerity into that thing, it becomes who they are. But you can do that with anything. Anything that has an intersection of those three things. I consider myself a fly fisherman because I put a lot of time, effort, attention, and resources. Believe me, you can see the bills of how much I put resources in. My wife's not happy about that.
Me as a hunter.
100%. There's a reason why I don't hunt as much as I like. It's because I can only afford one expensive hobby right now.
Yep.
So, but no, but other stuff, even your own family can be something. But the loss that people have is most of the time they focus, this is who I am, and everybody else gets second, gets the whatever's left, right? So they
Mhm.
don't invest a lot. Frankly, they don't invest a lot of time in their families. They do some, but if you want to, what they can do is say you take something like, hey, I really do want to devote more time to my family now that I'm not doing that anymore. Well, the way you do that is you get good at it. Maybe it's cooking dinner. Maybe it's, getting to know your house, cleaning up, making repairs, doing stuff like that. That's improving your home.
Mhm.
And then it's also spending some time getting to know your family a little better, giving dedicated time that's not going to be pulled away by your job. When you
Yeah.
do that, it's investing all those kind of things. And it seems like that helps out a lot of folks. They become your life rafts. When you lose that big thing, you got to have somewhere else to land. Ironically, one of the funds that I actually had when COVID happened, I took up cooking. Not because I was like, hey, this is great. It actually turned out to be something I really enjoy. But when my wife leaves me to the kitchen to cook dinner for my family, I then am getting good at this thing. I'm in a place that I'm getting to know my kitchen real well. So it's a home. And then on
Mhm.
top of that, I get to feed my family with it. So it's kind of part of the tribe too. And when I talk to somebody, if they know how to cook too, we get to chat about that.
Yeah.
So it,
I think that's super cool in anything that you like, yeah, whether it's hunting, fishing, sports, cooking, like there's always other people who are interested in the same or similar things. And then like that's one thing that I've loved about, I mean, even still, like I have, and I was kind of walking my dog before we hopped on to record this and thinking about just different like tribes we can use or communities that I have and like different identities in my life. And like I have coaching friends and I can go to those people. And like that is a community that is near and dear to my heart. And I love them. And I have some really close friends from that. And then I have people that I've met from the hunting and the outdoors community that are the same. And then there's people that are back home that you grow up with. And I think, yeah, it's really cool to be able to have those people that you can kind of always just go to and relate to. I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second.
sure.
Say, like you said, you mentioned you want to go, you kind of need a day away, and your wife is like, go fly fishing and like kind of just spend that day out there. Um, what happens when someone feels guilty about doing that? Like, hey, I know I need to escape, quote unquote, and I need to go do this thing that I love and I identify with and whatever, but like I feel guilty doing that because then I'm maybe leaving something else in the meantime.
Well, I would say this is in the form of an encouragement. Um, Generally, when you go take a few minutes to go take a knee, go somewhere and escape to do that thing, you'll come back better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you really do. You'll come back recharged and refreshed a lot of times. And Krisha used to kick me out of the house because she knew when I came back after a day of fishing, I was a better dad and a better husband.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, and so looking at this not as like a, hey, this isn't a selfish moment for me. This is me recharging so that I can go back and do better. This is to use a term for the military. This is not me relaxing. This is reconstituting.
Mm-hmm.
When we get back from a deployment, we go right into reconstitution, and
Mm-hmm.
reconstitution isn't really relaxing. It's a, hey, let's get our gear ready for the next one. Let's get our stuff reset and all that. Part of that is seeing. So it's a matter of reconstituting yourself so that you come back better. And frankly, I would argue that having those other identities brings something unique to every team. If you're one of the things that, and forgive me to keep going back to it, but one of the things that Kerry had mentioned is that he found his new thing in life because his team leader was a bow hunter. And he knew it well enough to be able to teach that to him. So he didn't just, his team leader didn't just show up as like, all I am is a Green Beret. I'm a Green Beret and a bow hunter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Green Beret, a bow hunter. I'm a chaplain. I'm a Christian. Whatever that identity is, you bring that to the table, and there's unique information and wisdom and things that all come from those identities that make you better to the teams you're on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. That's a big thing in like teamwork research is like, and a lot of what I've experienced working on like high performing human performance teams is like, yes, you have your chaplain, you have your strength coach, you have your athletic trainer, you have your physical therapist, your dietitian, all of your mental performance specialist, all of these things. But as individuals, not even just like as their careers and their professions, but as humans and individuals, they all bring different strengths to the table. And typically, yes, you need to fill this gap of this profession on a team, or in the military, you have like the teams, and there's the kind of your different MOSs and all of that you need to fill those. But a well high performing team is going to fill those with people who, say we have 5 people on a team, these 4 people possess these strengths. There's one strength that we're missing. We need to find this one person that's missing this strength, and that's going to help us be the most high functioning team. And I think there's so much research that's in that too, and I think that's a really cool topic also.
And I think that's also where the military has actually done. They've started figuring this out, is that people that aren't healthy up here or in here don't do their job well. And so part of this is, if you can, and there's a term that I'm kind of coining with this, it's called a meta identity. It's who you are, which is a conglomeration of all your little identities put together. Everybody has that, whether they choose to invest it all in one basket of I am the military or I am my job, versus I am my job and all these other things, or any combination of those. That person that has all those identities as a meta identity, they get to pick and choose those parts that are best for them, that fit best to who they are. And when they come to the team, they're more resilient because of it, because they know if they have a bad day at this, well, I still have enough mental headspace that, hey, I'm not just this thing. So I did bad today, but I'll do better the next day. Versus, wow, that may have just ruined my career. Maybe. But what if you have other things that you can find that sense of self-confidence from, that sense of home and that sense of tribe? If you have places there's an axiom we use in chaplaincy, and it's talking about stress response. And it says that a person's level of stress is inversely proportional to their perceived access to resources. Basically means that if I'm going through a stressor and I perceive that I have something that will either reduce or resolve that stressor, my stress level in that event goes down. So if I'm experiencing any given thing at work, but I also perceive that I have resources to get through this, then I'm going to go through that stressor a lot better. I'm more resilient.
Yeah, that's funny you say that. I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and I used to kind of have really bad anxiety for that reason. Like, you are stressed or anxious about the future because you perceive that you don't have control over it, or you don't have the resources for it, or you don't really know what's going on. And this person was like, yeah, I don't think that I've ever had anxiety. I kind of worry about like what the future is like. And I was like, okay, that's stress and that's anxiety. Like, that's exactly what that is. That's how that works. And they were like, oh, okay, well, that's good to know. But I think, yeah, kind of like I said, I was playing devil's advocate there. And sometimes people do feel guilty about escaping and going and doing that thing. But I think at the end of the day, it's giving yourself grace to go and do those things. And like I mentioned earlier, accepting that, yes, I might have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different identities. But it's okay to have those different identities. And like you said, those are what allow me or you or anyone else to show up and be the best person that you can be for your partner, for your team, for your coworkers, for your friends, all of those things. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just, giving yourself grace and allowing you to just be you and like do what you want to do.
Well, and there's also a part about this too. Listen, and it's a lot of operators, and I'll use that term for anybody who's operating in their job, that pulls them away all the time. If you can't invest a lot, because you don't have a lot to invest. If you look at it like this, you don't have an identity unless you invest in it. So if you can't invest a lot, kind of take a lesson from basic finances. You don't have a big chunk of money. What do? You invest a little bit over time. Most people, you may not be able to handle it. You may not have the ability to take 2 weeks to go scouting for a hunting trip, and you may not be able to go and so invest that. You just may not be able to. But hey, maybe if you realize you just want to invest in an identity, I just want to have a time away. You can grab a book and read for 15 minutes about hunting. You can learn a new technique. You can go take a walk in nature and go call that scouting for an hour. You can go find one of your buddies and swap some hunting stories. And that all is investing in that identity. It's reinforcing that identity in you a little bit more. And as you're getting that thing, it feels good to have those. So you don't have to always have 2 weeks off to go and do that and leave your family and go. You may not. Dude, I have 2 kids. I'd never get that. I get like maybe 5 or 6 fishing, like solid fishing days out of the year.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can, like I said, but I can go read a book. Or the other one is stacking identities. And by that, I mean this. You don't have to, let's say you feel guilty for going hunting because you got to leave your family behind. What if you teach your family how to hunt? What if they do it with you? Now you stack an identity, because now you're not only getting hunting time and you're enjoying that thing, you're also getting family time, which is, frankly, families want the same thing. They want your time, effort, attention, and resources. But you're kind of getting a double investment out of it. You're getting a chance to, you know, a good example that I use is I taught my daughter how to fly fish. I was shameless about it. I wanted a fishing buddy. And I taught her at a very early age how to do that. And so now it may not be her absolute favorite thing, but she will go with me and she knows how. And we can have, if she wants uninterrupted time with dad, we can just go for a fishing day. And that's a great, not only do I get double the investment, I'm also getting these really cool memories that go with it. And it's also leaving a legacy for my family.
Yeah, no, I think that's super cool. What is it specifically? And you may or may not have like a specific answer, but I'm a big advocate of like, for everything that we're talking about, whether it's stress relief, or just like finding yourself and figuring out who you are, like just getting outdoors. I know the organization you mentioned, specifically you guys go and you're fly fishing, which I think is also tons of fun and a really good way to do that. But if you're able to speak to like what it is about just being simply outdoors, right? Like you could be standing in water with a rod in your hand and never catch a freaking fish. And I'm still imagine that you had the best day ever, especially if your daughter's there with you. But like, yeah, what is it about just like being outdoors that, and I can kind of speak to it too, but I'm curious your thoughts, with kind of the perspective that you'll come from.
I will say there's some neurobiology behind it. And how we're kind of geared towards the outdoors. And I mean, you can talk about how having all the smells and sounds, it kind of engages all your senses, which is what we were designed to do. And if you put away your phone, and I say that as our biggest distraction, if you're out there, you're present, and it becomes a mindful exercise. You can just, you have so many things going on. If you can learn to focus outwardly on those things that are happening or the sensations, you're relaxing your brain. I kind of looked at it like this. When I go fishing, I'm not just thinking about fishing. I'm thinking about fishing. I'm thinking about the water temperature. I'm thinking about the air. I'm thinking about the shadows that are coming in there, where the fish lies, all those kind of things. Basically, I'm kicking all the penguins off the iceberg. I don't have any room for anything but fishing in my brain. And it's relaxing. I think that is probably one of the biggest parts. And the outdoors in particular, it has so many things that you can stimulate. And frankly, if you want to be successful at most outdoor activities, you have to be aware of what's going on. If you want to be a successful hunter, you have to be aware of the little cues that are out there that are easy to miss. You have to be aware of those tiny little smells, you know, that you can, and yes, you can smell animals. You know, you have to be mindful of like, hey, what are your smells? What are the sounds you're making? But when you're doing that, I look at it as if you've ever looked at a painting, say, oh, that's a pretty painting. But if you ever stop and really, really look at it, you start to see the artist's brushstrokes. You start to see all the little details that can really change that meaning behind it. Nature's the same way. You can get out there and you start seeing this cool symphony that's going on. Hey, there's a bird over there. You know, that's singing this, you know, that's doing this. And then you watch these 2 animals playing. Whatever is going on in that scenario, you're so focused on your task, but you're catching all that other stuff too.
I definitely, and I haven't thought of it to that degree. Like I said, I know there's like the neurobiology behind all of that. But yeah, it requires so much of your attention. And I think like, I'm forgetting, Mike Hearn, I had him on my podcast and he kind of says like hunting for him is like, that's how we're supposed to live. Like you think of just before we had to work these 9-to-5 jobs all the time, before we could go to the grocery store to get our food, before everything was like processed and manufactured and all of that, like we as humans were outdoors all of the time. We were hunters, we were gatherers, we got our own food, we found our own food. We didn't have technology to take our attention away, which is a whole other topic that we could touch on. Like I think technology would be not even just technology, the social media aspect of it and the connection, which I do think that it's cool that we can connect with people online. That is how you and I have met. But like, I think it goes too far sometimes. So for people to be able to get outside, to put their phones away, to have all of those senses stimulated and the way that we as humans are meant to be stimulated, I think there's nothing that compares to that.
Well, not to get off on a rant about cell phones, but yes, you're absolutely right. I look at it like this. I'm going to put this in that little identity module, right? Okay. Now, if you are using your phone and social media to connect with your tribe or learn new things, there's a value in that. But a lot of people aren't. We're doom scrolling. We're just randomly going wherever the algorithms send us. And if you look at it like this, you're investing a lot of time and effort and attention into your phone, and probably resources into your phone, but that doesn't fall under any of those. If you look at each one of those little circles in that Venn diagram of an identity module, as you invest, it's like putting money into a bank account in one of those. Or you can be putting money into something that's not going to have a return on investment. And cell phone usage is probably, unless you're getting a return on investment, you're probably not. So it becomes part of who you are, but is that something you really want to be? I'm a cell phone user. That doesn't.
Yeah. That's kind of funny. I'm big on putting the phone aside as much as you can, as often as you can. Now I get some people run their businesses online and they run their business on social media. And that's one thing that honestly I struggle with my podcast is I don't put any effort into marketing. I don't really put any effort into media because I don't want to be so tied to my phone or to technology that I have to do those things. So it's like, hopefully the growth just comes like authentically and organically because I don't want to be so tied to that or feel tied to that, because I know people who, and like I said, this is kind of going on a tangent, but it still relates to the identity thing, who they're big YouTubers or they're big on social media and they've got like thousands or millions of followers. So now they feel obligated to keep up with that. When you're around them, like they have to be creating content at all times, because if they're not always creating content, they're not keeping up with this social media identity that they have. And so then it's like, oh, well, now you're taking away from the present of like, I just want to be here and hang out with you.
Well, and that's the problem, is because when that becomes their identity, nothing's personal anymore. Everything is personal to them, it becomes a framework that they see the world through, and that's all they can do. The problem is someday you will lose popularity in your podcast, no matter how successful you are. One day it's just not going to be the trend anymore.
Yeah.
And if that is who you've primarily invested, and again, what you invest is what you become. So if you spend all your time, effort, attention, resources into your podcast, that's great. You'll probably have a successful podcast.
Yeah.
Until it's not.
Yeah.
But this is where, if you start looking at it like, this is who I am, all these things, I have, and I can invest where I want to invest. So you can be strategic about your investing that time, effort, attention, and resources. Then when your podcast suddenly goes south one day, it's like, well, that sucks, but it's not who I am.
Yeah.
I can still go fly fishing. I can still go hunting. I can still go invest in my family. And here's the other part that is really kind of a harsh thing to add to this, is that most identities in your life end. Pretty much almost all of them do, and they will end before your life does. I mean, your job is going to end someday. You'll retire, or you'll have an accident or something. That job will end. Your popularity will wane, because everybody's does. And honestly, even a sport, someday your shoulder and your knee is going to go out, and you may not be able to do that thing anymore. So one of the things that we try to counsel and coach people on with this is find the identities that have the longest expiration date on them. And just objectively speaking, find the ones that are those are probably the ones, they probably won't be as exciting, but they will probably be the ones that will be there for you when all the other ones fail. I made it a point, one of the reasons I retired when I did, I could have stayed in longer, but I realized my kids were young. And I wanted to be home and be present for them. I didn't want them to know Dad is the guy that comes home with a dirty flight suit after a few weeks, spends a couple of days and goes back out. I didn't want that. Yeah. I wanted to be a dad that helped raise them, that helped teach them, to help be all those things, to be a present dad. I'm investing in that now. Does that mean I had a lot of time for hunting and fishing? No, I'd love some. But at the same time, this return on investment, I'm going to have that family. And when my shoulder and knees go out, you know what? They're not going to be like, well, we don't have anything to talk about, Dad.
So, yeah, I think that's and kind of back to what you mentioned earlier, and when I was kind of playing devil's advocate, you had mentioned, and I wanted to talk about this. You have to grieve it. You just inevitably, no matter, and losing your identity is like any other loss that you experience, whether it's loss of a loved one or a friend or a partner or whatever. Like losing your identity and losing your sense of self is very similar, different but very similar, and you have to grieve that. And the question, like, not a question, but like a lot of people they want to avoid grief. Like grief is uncomfortable. And I always say, like I tell my friend, I like to call it sitting in your shit. Just go sit in your shit and deal with it. But nonetheless, like grieving is uncomfortable. It's a feeling that a lot of people like to try to avoid. And I'm sure that you see that often working with, whether it's military or law enforcement or whomever, because I think men more than women want to avoid grief and those uncomfortable negative feelings. What is something that you kind of do to encourage people that everyone experiences grief, you're not alone in this, and B, like, to encourage them that it's okay to experience that and to sit in that?
Well, I think somebody who's going through it is exactly like you said, though. It's sit in your shit. And not to condemn Western culture, but it is, we don't grieve well. We don't have a lot of the institutional forms of grieving that a lot of other cultures have. A lot of cultures, they have certain symbols. High context cultures have symbols that say, hey, I'm grieving. And people know, like, they just know, they see this thing and that person's grieving, and they will come and help. They'll probably be a little bit kinder. There's a social reason for that. The problem is the United States in particular, we don't tend to have a lot of those things. We have the funeral. We have some of these other places where the public acknowledgement of grief, but then there's not really a lot of room for mourning. People will go to the funeral and say, okay, well, back to work. And that's what they do. But in a lot of other cultures, they have months, if not years, of where they're expected culturally to be able to just grieve. They wear certain clothes. They have certain things that allow them to do that. They just learn that you're allowed to do it. Middle Eastern culture, they have people that will wail. Like they're almost expected to be like wailing at a funeral. They're allowed to express it publicly, male or female. We've kind of become, I think, pain averse. And I think because of that, we will do whatever it takes to avoid uncomfortable feelings, to avoid uncomfortable situations. And I mean, you could take a lesson from special operators. Sometimes the best tool you have is just being able to go headfirst into the discomfort. To put it another way, embrace the suck. Now, here's also, though, because really what grief is, it's an acknowledgement of how important something is that you lost. So what you can do, though, is when you've lost that identity, be open about that. Yeah, this sucks. I don't like this. But what you can also do as whether you want to call it soothing or just re-engaging, well, I don't have this thing anymore, but now because of that, I have a lot of time, effort, and attention and resources now that I was investing in this that I don't have, that I'm not investing anymore. So let's put it into something else. Let's put it into, hey, I'm going to become a damn good fisherman today. So I'm going to go read books on it. I'm going to put that level of obsession that I had in my job, I'm going to put that into something else and get really good at that thing. Or, hey, maybe it means taking that thing you're sort of good at, calling a buddy saying, hey, let's go fishing or let's go hunting. And what will happen is while you're in those moments, you're also going to maybe help find some of that sense of intimacy. Guys don't like that term intimacy, but I can't tell you how many times I've gone out on the water with a cop or a firefighter, and what we'll do is we'll go fish. So he'll start talking about something because it's their first time relaxing in a long time. They'll mention something. We'll talk for a few minutes. You can tell they're getting to that point where they're uncomfortable. Then we'll break off and go fish some more. Come back, talk a little bit more, and go back. Most of the time, after a day, you're kind of friends.
I love that. I think that's so good too. And I've got a close knit group of friends, and like male friends specifically in strength and conditioning. And I tell them all the time, there was like a podcast that I listened to over a year ago now. And this lady was saying that like women have such vulnerable and intimate friendships with their other women friends that men don't have. And that teaches men, not maybe not teaches them, but they're less vulnerable and intimate and sometimes in relationships because they don't have that same, and this is kind of on a totally different topic. But they
No,
don't have that
no,
same,
you're right though.
yeah, they don't have that same vulnerability and intimacy with their guy friends. And I've got like a really good group of guy friends who I love watching them just be like vulnerable and intimate with each other. And it's so cool to see that, like, you see how that plays into all other aspects of their life. And like you said, I think if you, whether a man or a woman, if you're around someone who feels a little hesitant to open up about the loss of an identity or anything, right? They're hesitating to grieve something that maybe they need to grieve, or they're hesitating to just talk about something that maybe they need to talk about. If you can be vulnerable and open to them initially, and they can feel like that can be reciprocated, the relief that that gives that person is second to none. Like the number of times I've been sitting on an airplane and the person, I ask a lot of questions. I'm really good at asking questions. I'm a curious person. And it's a 2+ hour flight. I'm getting off the flight and they're like, I've never told anybody any of that before. And I'm like, good, I love that. Like, you clearly just needed to get that off of your chest.
We honestly, you'd probably make a great chaplain, by the way, because typically they say that the single defining feature of like somebody that does chaplain or mental health work is somebody that has "Tell me your problems" written right here. But that's the thing, though. But that's the thing. If you're able, as a person who knows a military first responder that's going through this, like, realize this is what's going on. Realize they're not going to talk about it. But what you can do is just be a presence. It's actually this is kind of going into some chaplaincy tools. You know, there's a lot of calls I've been on. I didn't say a single word. I just sat there with them. And so maybe it looks like this. You know your buddy's going through that. So you say, hey, let's go fishing, man. And then you literally, and you just go fish for the day. You don't tell them that's what it's for. You don't tell them, you don't try to get them to open up maybe even. But sometimes just knowing that they're in a place that they can be themselves. Actually, it's one of the things that we kind of teach on, as a matter of fact. I'll go back to this. You know, that whole stacking identities thing we talked about? The reason that we target loved ones of military and first responders is for this reason. If we teach them how to fly fish or do that thing that they all do together, someday, I'm just going to say the husband, but the husband or wife that's working is going to come home and they had a bad day and they can't talk about it, or they won't talk about it. But what if that daughter or son or wife or husband says, hey, you just know, you can tell when your loved one's had a bad day. Say, hey, let's go fishing together. And you just go fishing. They may still not talk about it, but you are literally helping them relieve their stress. You're helping them engage in that identity. You're physically there for them if they did want to talk about it. And depending, they may, but they may not. But then they come home from that day and say, you know what? I went through that thing together. I went through that tough time. I couldn't even tell my family, but they knew something was wrong, but they were there for me. How cool is that? So sometimes having those other identities has a real big value in that you can pull somebody else out of that.
I think that's super cool because that's super common in first responder populations and military populations where, maybe they experience something that they don't feel like they can come home and tell their spouse. Like, I watched a kid die in my arms in a burning building today, and it's hard to come home and like put that, you kind of feel like you're putting a burden, and this is obviously, I've never done that myself, this is what has been communicated to me. It kind of feels like you're putting a burden on your spouse or on your partner when you share those things. So I don't even necessarily think it's not that they don't want to share, it's just that like they don't want to share that burden and they feel like they have to, like being the man of the household, or and women do it too. They feel like they have to keep that to themselves, but inevitably that stacks and stacks and stacks, and things continue to happen and traumatic events continue to happen. And then all of a sudden, and this is what leads to some divorces in these populations, is that now there's someone completely different because they have experienced and built all of these traumatic things that their partner doesn't know anything about. And to your point, maybe they don't have to open up and say explicitly everything that happened, but like when they're coming home and maybe something seems a little off, find something that you can do together that's outside of just sitting on the couch watching TV together.
And that's exactly it. You know what? One of the ones, like, and again, my wife and I have found all kinds of things. Thankfully, just in the last couple of years, she's actually gotten into fly fishing. Oh, I've been praying
Nice.
for
Yeah.
that.
I love it.
But no, one of the things, like, it's funny, like, if I've had a bad day, she'll know, and she may give me a little space. But what I try to do now is I try to go, hey, babe, can I cook tonight? And I'm able to go do something, because actually that's for me. Because what it does is it puts me in a place where I'm doing something I'm good at, in a place that I'm comfortable with, and working with my tribe. I don't have to tell her what the bad day was for necessarily, but I'm doing something that's making something better. I make my wife's, if my wife's had a rough day, I can go do that. And now I can make our lives a little bit better because of that. So I have re-engaged that identity. When people go through experiences, big experiences in their life, apart from their spouse or apart from their loved one, they are drifting apart actively, because they're living a life that they don't know anything, that other person doesn't know about. So this maybe has altered your course a little bit. Well, you're gradually doing this versus, hey, if in that moment your spouse says, hey, let's go fishing, you may still not know about it, but you're going through it together, and you have that memory of that, and you do that, you stack that again and again and again. And you know what? Yeah, maybe I don't know most of what my spouse went through for the thing, but I was there for it. And you can know that you made it a little better. But the same thing goes with, like, if you're the one going through the stressor. Hey, babe, something's wrong, but I can't talk. I really don't want to talk about it. Can we just go fishing? And go fishing. And you know what? By the time you're done fishing, you feel a little better. They've sort of got their old spouse back. And so there's ways to do it without actually, again, talking about it's great. Sometimes it's not practical.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point to make too, because like you said, I come from the perspective, like, I love when someone wants to tell me those things, because like I said, I think communicating is huge. But at the end of the day, yeah, hey, let's go fishing, let's go for a hike, let's go for a walk, let's go do this thing that I know that you really like to do, that really kind of relieves stress for you. Let's go do this together. And I've never kind of thought of it from that perspective, is that I'm still there supporting them in that time that they need support, but they just can't talk about it. And maybe eventually, on 3 days in a row of fishing, if that's what it gets to, that they are like, okay, I just got to let it all out now. And then maybe they never do. But and I'm saying this for myself, but like for anyone else too, there's so much value in just being present and showing up for someone when they feel like there's no one else there that's going to be present and show up for them.
There was and I'm going to pull another one from chaplaincy in this, but it's a term that's bandied around a lot with it. It's ministry of presence. It's literally the ministry of just being there. And to minister to somebody is just to care for them, right? So the ministry of presence literally means you are going to be there just so that they're not alone. And sometimes being able to be there and just have a safe space that, like, we don't have to talk if I don't want to, is incredible. There are days, when I was out flying, I'd have bad days. Some days, yes, I'd want to go fishing. Other days, I just wanted to sit there, give my kids a hug, and like that's all I wanted. I didn't have to talk about it. I just wanted to be in their presence. So a lot of times, it's just that. It's just learning how to be present with that person, do something in a place where they feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think that's big. And yeah, I think safety is what comes to mind, like a place where you feel like safe. But just being around those people, whether it is your partner or your tribe at work or whomever, or maybe it is a place not around people, whatever. Hopefully that there's people involved though, because I feel like relationships are very important in these kind of situations, whether it's
Dogs
a friendship. Yeah, dogs are great too. Dogs are very great. My dog is registered. I was just telling someone my dog is registered as an emotional support dog because she is exactly that. But I think there's value, yes, to show up and just to be present. And if you don't have someone that you can show up and be present around, insert the outdoors. Go where you can be present, where all of these, whatever it is that's bothering you, that's stressing you out, that's making you anxious, is kind of not even at the forefront of your mind anymore, because you are now outside and all of these other senses are being stimulated, and you can be present in the moment that you're at. And I think that's, in today's society and America specifically, we really struggle with being present. I know I used to struggle with it a lot, and I've gotten so much better at it. And I try to help a lot of people in my life with it now too. But a lot of us struggle with being present. It's hard.
It absolutely is. And well, and again, not to blame it all on cell phones and technology, but I think a lot of it is we've literally trained ourselves to have ADHD. Forgive the expression, but like if you
Yeah.
look at what the clinical definition of what ADHD is, they'll describe it as somebody who's clicking channels constantly. It's exactly what we're doing on our phones and multiple screens all day long.
Mm.
So we probably have habits that resemble that. And we struggle because of that. But like you're right, you can go off. This is also going back to the identity thing. But if you go outside, and you don't have to have somebody else necessarily there, you can still be engaging in a thing you do. I go fishing by myself a lot of times. I love that. It's I get to be in a pretty place and I get to go do something that I'm not bad at and I can enjoy it. You don't have to have all three of those. Now doing it together and all three helps, but you can still engage in one. Hey, read a book by yourself about that thing, or
Mhm.
but again, taking a walk outside is huge. I mean, again, the psychology behind it, but it's just most people kind of know that if you're outside and you make it a point to be present outside, it
Mhm.
makes a lot of stressors go down. At least turn the volume down on them.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it became like a trend of oh, like girls started, they called it like a hot girl walk, but it's what the intent behind it was going outside and like not being on your phone, just going for a walk, stepping away from everything else that's bothering you to help you like get back to your sense of self. And I think that was like a really cool thing that came from social media. Rarely do really
Mm-hmm.
cool things come from that. But it was a trend that was like, yeah, just like get outside, go on your walk, like be to yourself. And that's like, if nothing else, having a dog and like forcing me to go and walk it is like, okay, I needed this time to just be out here to remove myself from anything else that's going on, whether it's for 10 minutes or whether it's for an hour. And there's value in spending. Yes, I think relationships are big, but there's value in spending time alone too. And being able to be present alone, because a lot of people, especially if you've experienced a lot of traumatic events in your life, don't like being alone, because it's scary and you have to sit there with your thoughts, and that can be,
Along with your demons.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
and that can be scary. And I totally get it. So a lot of people don't even like that alone time, which I think there's a lot of value in that too.
And I will tell you, as somebody personal disclosure, I was diagnosed with post traumatic stress disorder coming out of the military.
Mm.
And, if you, for some pretty good reasons, um, it actually did become harder for me to be alone. And I don't go fishing by myself as much. I will still go because
Uh-huh.
that's also something that I can engage my brain in. So I'm not thinking about being alone with my demons. I'm thinking about fishing.
Yeah.
But I don't get a lot of introspection when I'm out there when I'm by myself. But if I'm
Yeah.
fishing with somebody else, it's funny. I find myself kind of feeling okay with like letting my mind go where it goes to, just
Mhm.
having somebody else present. So yeah, it's a huge. There is value both in being alone if you can,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
if not, you know what? Just being alone with it. The term is being alone with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be talking. You can just kind of be in each other's presence, and sometimes that's a pretty big comfort.
Yeah.
I,
No.
I'll give you one little story at least. This just happened to me the other day of the phone thing though. Um, my wife and I and our kids, we were all going up into the mountains to kind of go drive around and go play. First stop, we stopped at a restaurant and I left my phone there. We drove off and I was probably an hour away before I realized it was gone. Called them, they had it saved fine. But the entire day I spent without my phone. And you know what? It was really relaxing. It was
Mm-hmm.
actually way less stressful because I was able to just be present with my family. I had realized how much time I actually focus on that and started looking at my family as the distraction, which is not a
Mm-hmm.
healthy thing. But it
Yeah.
kind of taught me to be present with this. So sometimes putting that away may actually lower your anxiety and stress.
Yeah, I would agree. That's one thing I love. Like sometimes where I go hunting or just hiking or anything, the second if I like look at my phone and I don't have service, I'm like airplane mode. I'm just out of it for the rest of the day, and this is how it's gonna go. And it's the best day ever. Like no, I can't contact anyone. No one can contact me. And not that I'm trying to like isolate, but it just like you said. I'm in this space where I'm present with whatever it is that I'm doing, and that helps me a ton. And I think that's really cool. Well, we are coming up on an hour here,
Oh
Ryan.
yeah.
I end all of my episodes asking my guests, what does wild strength mean to you? It's a play on words of the name of the podcast. So Ryan, what does wild strength mean to you? Or what comes to mind when you think of wild strength?
I think maybe it's the first thing that popped in my head was, drawing strength from the wild, being outside, finding that identity, realizing that there's a very primitive part about us
Mm-hmm.
that is part of part of our DNA, and when we get out into that thing, I think it releases something in us. We kind of feel like a lot of people go to the outdoors, they feel like themselves, and there's strength in that. So to me, that's kind of what, if I were to hear wild strength, that's where it goes.
Yeah, I love that. And if people have any questions or they want to reach out to you, where can they find you? Is there an email they can reach out to, or what does that look like?
You can find me on LinkedIn pretty easily. It's just Ryan Padgett, obviously. For an email, you can, if it's for this, you can send it to Boldface Fly Fishing, BOLDFACE, fly fishing, all one word, at gmail.com. And that's probably the best way. And then we also have an Instagram with the same name. So if you guys ever want to, I would love to teach more people. And if you have any folks that want to learn how to be fly fishing mentors to kind of create that environment for other first responders and military folks that need it, we'd love to chat with you.